I found my koi fish floating belly up while the smell of bleach hung in the air, and all I could think was how calm she looked walking away from the crime like it was just another Tuesday. I stood barefoot in my backyard, the early morning dew clinging to the grass, staring at the once clear water that now bubbled with milky white swirls. The fountain that had brought me peace after long days on the ranch was now a tomb. 5 koi, each one named by my late wife, gone in one night. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just stared, and somewhere between rage and disbelief, I noticed the bleach bottle half concealed beneath the boxwood shrub. My name's Mac, and I moved to this quiet gated community 2 years ago after retiring early from a career in agricultural engineering. I bought a modest corner property with a wide backyard, a little greenhouse, and the fountain I installed myself with stone I hauled from my own land. It was my sanctuary. The HOA didn't like that it didn't match their suburban aesthetic, especially not Karen. Karen Carmichael, HOA president, self-declared neighborhood aesthetic authority, and quite possibly a retired villain from a soap opera. She had thin patience, loud opinions, and a white SUV that she parked just close enough to everyone's mailbox to make checking the mail a daily game of hopscotch. Our feud started small. First, it was the improper wooden trellis I'd built behind the fountain. Then she cited me for unauthorized ornamental landscaping. I ignored the warnings. She responded with a notice about neighborhood harmony violations. What does that even mean? I laughed at first. She didn't. I wouldn't have believed she'd take it this far until I crouched down beside the fountain and noticed the trail. Small drops, almost invisible on the concrete path, led away from the edge of the basin and straight to the side of my property where the fence gate bordered the communal walking path. The bleach bottle had a smudged glove print on it, and the smell was unmistakable. I knew it wasn't just a random act. Someone did this on purpose. That's when I remembered the garden gnome. A few months earlier, after one too many stolen packages and a mysteriously broken greenhouse panel, I installed a tiny high-definition security camera inside a garden gnome with sunglasses. I bought it more as a joke than anything serious, but now I rushed back inside to my desktop computer and pulled up the footage. Fast forward to 3:42 a.m., and there she was, Karen Carmichael, hoodie up, gloves on, bleach bottle in hand, tiptoeing like a raccoon on a mission. She crouched by the fountain, twisted the cap off, and poured the liquid right into the water like she was adding cream to her coffee. When she finished, she tossed the bottle and walked off, not even a glance back. I paused the footage and stared at the still frame. It was her, not a doubt in the world. And the part that hit me hardest wasn't just the loss of my fish. It was the calm, calculated way she did it, like she'd rehearsed, like this was just step one. I should have stormed over. I should have printed the footage and shoved it into every HOA mailbox. But I didn't. I took a breath, then another. I thought about what my wife would have done. She always said, let people bury themselves if they're holding the shovel. So instead, I leaned back in my chair and started thinking like an engineer again. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The next day I cleaned the fountain. I cleared the dead fish with gloved hands and scrubbed every stone surface. I replaced the water, fitted in a new filter, and visited the local koi breeder. By evening, 5 new fish, bright, healthy, and unaware of suburban warfare, swam in their new home. I even added a sign next to the fountain that read, "Do not touch," under chemical observation. It was nonsense, of course, but the kind of nonsense that would pique Karen's curiosity. Then I added a second gnome. This one had an even better angle, hidden in the rock bed behind the hydrangeas. It could catch both the side entrance and the fountain in crystal clear footage. I tested it that night and adjusted the lighting to ensure no shadows blocked the view. I knew her. She wouldn't stop at one hit. Her kind never does. 2 days later, I caught her watching from the sidewalk as I fed the koi. She smiled that fake polite smile and waved with just 2 fingers. I waved back, said nothing, gave her nothing. That night I stayed up past midnight watching the live feed like it was a nature documentary. Nothing happened. But the next night, around 2:47 a.m., I saw motion. Karen again, No hoodie this time, just a big floppy sun hat like she was gardening in the moonlight. She tipped it along the side yard, glancing around like she was in some heist movie. I watched her reach into a tote bag and pull out another bottle, this time clear, not white. She crouched beside the fountain, twisted the cap, and poured something in. Then she stood, wiped her hands on a towel, and walked off, disappearing down the side alley. I didn't even need to check the water. I already knew. I still did, though, just to be sure. The water was cloudy again, and the fish were sluggish. I scooped a bit into a container and sniffed. Not bleach this time. Ammonia. She was changing her tactics. I saved the footage, made copies, and backed it up to 3 locations. Then I did something else. I emailed the HOA board. Not a full report, just a little teaser. I titled it Concerns Regarding Fountain Sabotage and included 2 still images. One of Karen mid-pour with the bleach, the other of her in that ridiculous hat frozen in night vision green. I didn't say anything else, just hit send and went back to bed. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know this. She poured poison in my piece, and I'm not just going to sit back and let her rot it away. If she wanted a neighborhood war, she should have picked a better battlefield than my backyard, and she definitely should have looked twice at that garden gnome. The morning after I sent the email to the HOA board, things around the neighborhood felt a little off. People were looking at me longer than usual, nodding in a way that didn't feel like simple politeness. Domenic from 2 houses down slowed his jog and waved like he wanted to say something but changed his mind. Even old Mrs. Abernathy, who usually only looked up from her knitting if someone knocked over her mailbox, gave me a long, suspicious glance when I walked by. I hadn't said a word to anyone directly, but I knew that image of Karen in night vision had started circulating, quietly, carefully, just the way I wanted. Karen, meanwhile, was acting like she'd won. She strolled around with her sun visor and clipboard, smiling wide, like she was the queen of a peaceful empire. If she noticed the tension, she didn't show it. That made her dangerous. Someone who doesn't realize they're being hunted always walks into the trap with confidence. I spent that week laying groundwork, not with threats or loud accusations, but with precision. I visited my cousin again, the one who worked at the law firm downtown. We sat on his back porch sipping lemonade as I explained what had happened. He didn't laugh. He didn't say I was overreacting. He just nodded, asked for the footage, and started typing into his laptop. According to him, what Karen had done wasn't just a neighborhood squabble. It could qualify as criminal mischief, malicious property damage, and possibly even animal cruelty if I decided to press. But he advised me to wait, build the case, let her show her pattern, make it impossible for her to wriggle out with an apology and a batch of store-bought cookies. That's when I got the idea to bait her a little further. I stopped by the local hardware store and picked up a couple of realistic-looking but entirely fake chemical warning signs. One read, highly toxic water treatment in use. Another had a bright red skull and crossbones and something in small print about respiratory hazard. I posted both of them near the fountain, making sure they were visible but not too obvious. Then I added a few empty jugs labeled industrial cleaner and left them casually leaning against the side of the shed, just enough to make her curious. And then I waited. That Thursday, the HOA had its monthly meeting at the community center. I usually skip those to avoid blood pressure spikes, but this time I arrived early and sat right in the front row. Karen stood at the podium like a game show host and started rattling off updates about shrub regulations, sidewalk chalk guidelines, and how many inches of flower bed could extend beyond the edge of a driveway. I watched her closely. She was in her element. Then, halfway through the meeting, she paused, adjusted her glasses, and introduced a new motion. She called it the Decorative Water Feature Removal Proposal. According to her, certain homes were adding water installations that did not align with the neighborhood aesthetic. She didn't name me directly, but everyone in that room knew who she meant. A few people shifted uncomfortably in their folding chairs. Domenic raised his hand and asked if any of these installations were breaking code or posing a danger. Karen smiled and said that while no official infractions had occurred, the general vibe was being negatively affected. That was her phrase, general vibe. I almost laughed out loud, but I didn't. I leaned back and waited. When she asked for votes, no hands went up. Not one. She cleared her throat and asked again, this time trying to reframe it as a request to standardize outdoor aesthetics. Still nothing. Even the usually spineless Mr. Kendrick, who once filed a complaint because someone's wind chimes were too melodic, kept his hand down. She looked rattled, just a flicker, but I saw it. The vote failed. Meeting adjourned. People started filtering out. I stood slowly, caught Dominic's eye, and nodded once. He gave me a thumbs up. That night, I didn't go to bed. I made coffee and sat by the window with the live feed pulled up on my tablet. Hours passed. Nothing. A possum waddled through the hydrangeas. A neighborhood cat skulked by. At 2:31 a.m., she came back. Karen, no visor, no gloves, just Karen in a bathrobe, slippers, and the same smug expression she always wore when handing out HOA warnings. She walked straight to the fountain, looked at the warning signs, and laughed. I watched her pull out her phone and take photos. Then she reached into her robe pocket and pulled out a small bottle. She knelt beside the fountain and poured something in, shaking the bottle for good measure. She stood, nodded to herself like she had done something noble, and turned to leave. But this time, I had upgraded the gnome's camera to include night vision audio. I heard her mutter to herself, something about poison water being a health risk, and doing the neighborhood a favor. Her voice was calm, cold, like she was doing chores. I saved the video, added it to the growing collection, and emailed it to my cousin. The next morning, I noticed the water had turned a strange greenish tint. The fish were still alive but clearly stressed. That was enough. I tested the water, high traces of ammonia, and something else that I couldn't identify. I took it to a local lab for a full analysis. I wanted every detail. By noon, I received an unexpected email. One of the HOA board members, Eleanor, wanted to stop by and talk. She said she had questions about the footage and the recent vote. I told her to come by that evening. When she arrived, I showed her everything: the footage, the bleach, the ammonia, the timestamps, the still images, the muttered confession. She sat in silence for a long time before finally saying, "I knew she was petty, but this is something else." She promised to bring it up at the emergency board session the next day. Karen had no idea how close she was to the edge of the cliff. As the sun went down, I walked out to the fountain and sat beside it. The water shimmered softly in the fading light. The koi moved slowly but steadily. I knew it was only a matter of time before she made another move. But I also knew something else. The next time she touched my fountain, it wouldn't just be neighborhood drama anymore. It would be evidence, and she was about to walk right into it. The following morning arrived with a strange kind of quiet, not the peaceful early bird has the yard to himself kind of quiet. No, this was that tense, something's about to happen kind of quiet. The breeze seemed to pause just long enough to listen in, and even the birds kept their chirping to a polite minimum. I sat by the kitchen window nursing my coffee, eyes trained on the fountain as if watching it could prevent another act of sabotage. The koi were alive but sluggish, hovering near the bottom, moving only when the sun broke over the hedges. I didn't blame them. If I were a fish in Karen's neighborhood, I'd be staying low too. Eleanor had said she'd speak to the board today. I trusted her more than most. She'd lived in this neighborhood for over 20 years and only recently joined the HOA board out of what she described as necessity. Her words, not mine, said it was either her or the guy who once tried to sue a squirrel for eating through his garden netting. She had grit, and she'd seen Karen's kind before. But I also knew Karen wasn't one to roll over quietly. She'd been running this HOA like her personal kingdom for far too long. The second she smelled rebellion, she'd lash out harder than ever. Around noon, I received a text from Dominic. Just 3 words. "It's happening today." I didn't need to ask what that meant. Eleanor was pushing for an emergency meeting, and the footage was going to hit the table. Karen, completely unaware, was about to become the main event. I spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the security clips again. Not because I needed more evidence. I had more than enough. But because I wanted to make sure every second was airtight, every frame clear, every audio line crisp. By the time the sun began to dip, I had a full digital package backed up in 5 places. If Karen tried to spin her way out, she was going to spiral right into a wall of her own making. Later that evening, while I was finishing up in the greenhouse, I heard something strange out front. Not the sound of footsteps or car doors, more like plastic being dragged across pavement. I walked around the side of the house and saw her, Karen in broad daylight, pulling a garbage bag toward my recycling bin. She froze when she saw me, one hand still gripping the knot at the top of the bag. I raised an eyebrow, said nothing. She cleared her throat and forced a smile. "Oh, Mac," she said, pretending to be surprised. "I didn't realize you were out here. You didn't think to ask before using my bins." I asked calmly, stepping closer. "Just trying to tidy the street," she replied, her tone sticky sweet. "You know, keeping things neat for everyone." I held her gaze. "So what's in the bag?" She hesitated, then quickly said, "Just some yard waste. Nothing special." I walked up, bent down, and untied the knot before she could object. The top opened with a damp pop, and inside I saw a half-empty bottle of ammonia, a pair of soaked gloves, and several soaked paper towels. Not a single leaf. She went stiff. Her eyes darted to the bottle and then to me, but I didn't say a word. I just stared at her until she finally took a step back. "You've been recording me," she said, quieter now, like the words surprised her as she said them. I didn't confirm or deny. I didn't have to. Her face told me she'd already knew. "This is harassment," she continued, voice rising now. "You're spying on your neighbors. That's against HOA guidelines." I nodded slowly. "Maybe you should bring that up at the meeting tonight." She froze again, this time visibly shaken. She hadn't heard about the emergency meeting. That much was clear. "What meeting?" she asked, almost choking on the words. "You'll find out soon enough," I replied, stepping past her to take the bag. I carried it to my own trash bin and dumped it in. She didn't stop me. She didn't say another word. She just turned and walked away, fast and stiff, like she was holding in a scream. By the time the emergency meeting began, the community center was already buzzing. More people had shown up than I'd seen at a gathering in months. Word had spread fast. Dominic met me at the door and handed me a USB stick just in case anything went wrong with the projector. Inside, the tension was thick. Karen was seated at the front, eyes darting around, her leg bouncing beneath the table. She tried to start the meeting herself, but Eleanor quickly took the floor, stating that this session was called under board authority to address recent acts of property damage within the community. I stood when asked. I walked calmly to the front and inserted the USB into the projector. No preamble, no speech, just the footage. The lights dimmed, and the screen lit up with Karen in full suburban stealth mode, pouring bleach into my fountain under the pale glare of moonlight. Gasps rippled through the room. Then came the second clip. Karen with the bottle of ammonia, muttering to herself. The third clip sealed it, her in the bathrobe, casually poisoning the water like it was part of her morning routine. When the lights came back on, the room was dead silent. All eyes turned to Karen, who looked paler than the projection screen. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "You can't prove that's bleach. That could be anything." "We had it tested," I replied. "High concentrations of both bleach and ammonia. Also, I found this in my trash today." I held up the ammonia bottle from earlier. Her eyes widened. "You planted that," she spat. "This is all fake. You're manipulating footage." But before she could continue, Eleanor spoke. "Karen, there's no manipulating this. We've seen enough. This isn't just rule enforcement anymore. This is vandalism and endangerment." A voice from the back chimed in. "That fountain's near the community path. What if a kid had touched it?" Someone else shouted. "She's been on power trips for years. Finally caught red-handed." The board moved quickly after that. A motion was made to remove Karen from her role as president, effective immediately. The vote was unanimous. No one spoke in her defense, not even Mr. Kendrick, who once praised her for removing a tire swing because it was too whimsical. Karen sat frozen, as if her body had stopped taking commands from her brain. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The room did it for me. When it was over, I collected my USB, nodded to Eleanor and Dominic, and walked out into the cool night air. I didn't look back. Karen had finally poured herself into a corner, and this time there was no bleach strong enough to clean up the mess. The day after Karen was removed from the HOA board felt like someone had opened a window in a room that had been shut for too long. The neighborhood breathed differently. Lawns looked greener. Birds sounded louder, and even the air seemed lighter. I walked past the fountain with my coffee in hand, watching the koi swim in slow, lazy loops, unbothered by the chaos of the past week. I should have felt triumphant, maybe even smug, but all I really felt was tired. I hadn't slept right in days, and though Karen was officially stripped of her title, I knew she wasn't done. Someone like her doesn't just disappear quietly. She would come back, not with bleach bottles maybe, but in some other form. Pettiness like hers always looks for a new outlet. Sure enough, she wasted no time proving me right. That afternoon, I got a knock on my door from a city official. He wore a reflective vest and carried a clipboard. Said he was there to inspect my property for code violations related to water runoff, unauthorized chemical storage, and potential hazards related to ornamental structures. I blinked at him, asked him where the report came from. He didn't say Karen's name, but he didn't have to. The man was polite, even apologetic, and admitted someone had submitted an anonymous complaint. I walked him through the yard, showed him the signs were just props, the chemicals were fake, and the water was regularly tested. He chuckled at the garden gnome cam and said it was probably smarter than half the surveillance the city had installed. 20 minutes later, he gave me a clean report and said I was free to go about my day. The thing about people like Karen is that even when they lose, they try to ruin the victory. She couldn't bear that I had outsmarted her, that I had exposed her, that people in the neighborhood were now smiling at me instead of her. So she turned to paperwork and bureaucracy, trying to bury me in red tape since bleach didn't work. But what she didn't know was that I had grown up in a family where neighbors were either friends or obstacles, and I'd learned a long time ago how to deal with the latter. My father used to say, "You don't swing a hammer when a scalpel will do." So I sharpened my scalpel. I called the city myself and filed a counter report. I let them know that a resident had been disposing of harmful chemicals on private property and had been caught on video doing it multiple times. I attached the footage. I included the timestamps. I added the lab results from the contaminated water. I also mentioned the recent attempt to file a fraudulent safety complaint as retaliation. The woman on the phone thanked me for the thorough documentation. She said they would open an investigation. I knew that meant Karen would soon be dealing with something she couldn't control with HOA newsletters or veiled threats. She'd have to answer to people who didn't care about curb appeal or symmetrical lawn decor. They cared about environmental safety, fines, and legal responsibility. Later that week, I spotted her in the community park, talking to one of the board members. Her arms were flailing, her voice louder than it needed to be. She kept pointing toward my house. The board member just stood there, nodding occasionally but saying very little. When she stormed off, he looked over and saw me sitting on the bench near the pond. He gave me a small wave and walked over. "You okay?" he asked, easing down beside me. "Never better," I replied. He nodded toward the fountain in my yard. "She's obsessed with it, you know. I think it drives her nuts that it doesn't belong to the HOA's common space." I smiled. It's like she thinks she has jurisdiction over Serenity. He laughed. "You know, we're voting next month for new board positions. A lot of people are saying your name." I shook my head before he could even finish. "I'd rather get sprayed by my own garden hose for a week than run that circus." He laughed again, then leaned back. "Still, people appreciate what you did." She was starting to scare folks. I didn't answer right away. My eyes followed a pair of ducks waddling past the pond. I thought about the lengths Karen had gone to just to destroy something she didn't like, and I thought about how long I'd tolerated it before fighting back. The day after that, the official investigation notice went up on her property. A bright orange flyer taped to the side of her mailbox that drew the attention of every passing dog walker and cyclist. Within hours, whispers were circling the neighborhood again. Some said she was facing fines. Others claimed she'd be charged. I didn't care to correct or confirm anything. Let the speculation bloom. The truth was more than enough. She came to my property 3 times under cover of darkness, carrying bleach and ammonia, and I caught her every single time. Now, the consequences were doing what consequences do best, unfolding without mercy. 3 days later, I got another letter in the mail, this one from Karen herself. Handwritten, folded into thirds, no envelope, just placed directly into my mailbox like she was too proud to use a stamp. It read, "You've humiliated me and made a mockery of this community. I hope you're happy living among cowards who bend to blackmail and cameras. My property value is down, and your fish pond is a health risk. I'll be contacting my attorney." I tore it in half and tossed it into the fireplace without a second glance. The neighborhood seemed to settle after that. People waved a little more. Some stopped to compliment the fountain. Even the postman took an extra second to ask what kind of koi I kept. I told him their names, the ones my wife had picked out when we first built the fountain together. He smiled and said his grandmother used to name her fish too. For a moment, things felt whole again. But just when I thought it was over, the royal surprise came. Eleanor knocked on my door the next morning, holding a thick envelope. She handed it to me with a raised brow. "This came from the city. I figured you'd want it fast." Inside were official photos, scanned documents, and a notice of legal action, not against me, against Karen, for trespassing, illegal dumping of hazardous materials, and attempted environmental tampering. Her actions had triggered penalties not only from the HOA board, but from the local Department of Environmental Protection. There were fines, serious ones, and a recommendation for mandatory community service. I stood in the doorway, stunned for a moment. "Guess bleach doesn't wash away everything," Eleanor said before walking off. I watched her go, then looked back down at the fountain. The koi swam in a perfect circle, calm and steady, untouched by the world of petty wars and HOA politics. Karen thought she could poison peace. Instead, she fertilized justice. The morning Karen began her community service was the first time I saw her without her usual polish. No pressed blouse. No perfectly matched sun hat and clipboard. No parade of smug smiles. Just a plain gray sweatshirt, a neon vest the city made her wear, and a trash grabber in her hand. She was walking the neighborhood paths she once ruled like royalty, now forced to pick up candy wrappers and discarded water bottles. The look on her face wasn't anger, at least not the explosive kind. It was the quieter, heavier kind, the look of someone realizing the world wasn't bending anymore. I watched from my front porch as she moved past my fence line, her gaze never once meeting mine. She didn't look at the fountain either. She didn't even glance. I didn't say a word. I didn't wave. I just sat in the same chair I'd watched her from when this all began and sipped my coffee as if nothing were different. But everything was. The same woman who once tried to erase my little corner of peace now had to walk past it every day as a reminder that not everything could be controlled or intimidated. Sometimes, the people you try to silence are the ones who record every word, every step, every drop of bleach in the dark. The HOA board was different now, too. After Karen's removal, the new leadership started cleaning house. The bylaws were revised. Transparency meetings were introduced. They even created a rotating neighborhood council where any resident could sit in on a meeting and voice concerns without fear of being fined for planting the wrong species of flower. People actually started showing up to vote, not just to complain. Dominic joined full-time as treasurer, and Eleanor was elected unanimously as the new president. The tone of everything shifted. I hadn't seen so many front porch conversations in years. The fountain, surprisingly, became a symbol. People stopped by just to see it, especially after the story quietly made its way around. I never bragged about it, never retold the events with flair, but somehow everyone seemed to know. It became its own kind of neighborhood folklore. Parents brought their kids to look at the koi. Neighbors brought leftover fish food and left it in a little tin beside the bench I had placed nearby. Some days, it felt like the whole community was trying to repaint what Karen had stained. A month passed, then another, and eventually I stopped looking for signs of revenge. Karen had been fined thousands. She lost her power, her reputation, and the control she used to weaponize against people she didn't like. The city closed their case after she completed her service, but the HOA kept her on probation. She wasn't banned from the neighborhood, though. That part was never my goal. I didn't want her exiled. I just wanted her exposed, and she was in the most complete and undeniable way. Her own actions had done the work for me. All I did was press play. Then one evening, something unexpected happened. I was working in the greenhouse, trimming a few tomato plants, when I heard a car door close. I looked out to see Karen standing at the edge of my yard with a brown paper bag in her hand. She looked different. No makeup, no sunglasses, just tired eyes and a stiff posture. For a second, I thought maybe she was here to yell again, to accuse me of something else. But she didn't move. She stood there like she wasn't sure what to do next. I stepped out of the greenhouse and walked toward her. She held the bag out, unsure. "It's just some koi food," she said, voice quiet. "I found it on sale." I took it slowly, saying nothing at first, then nodded once. "Thanks." She shifted her weight like she was waiting for more. "I don't expect forgiveness," she added. "Just figured it might mean something to try." "It might," I said after a pause. "But not today." She nodded, almost grateful for the honesty, and walked back to her car without another word. That night I sat beside the fountain. The moonlight danced across the water, and the koi stirred gently beneath the surface, weaving around each other like strands of slow-moving light. I opened the bag of food and scattered a little across the surface. The ripples stretched outward, soft and endless. I thought about how quickly things had escalated from a petty rule about mailboxes to a full-blown Bleach attack to legal action to this moment of near silence and mutual acceptance that some fences just don't get mended. And that's okay. Some people don't need to be forgiven to be forgotten. They just need to be stopped. The koi swam closer, their mouths opening like little vacuums as they pulled in the floating bits. I leaned back against the bench and let the cool air settle in. No more meetings. No more cameras. No more late-night surveillance. Just still water, soft splashes, and the comfort of knowing I had defended something worth keeping. Not just the fish, not just the fountain, but the principle of peace, the right to enjoy your corner of the world without someone constantly trying to repaint it to match their own shade of control. A few days later, I added a new sign to the fountain. Not a warning this time, and not a deterrent, just a simple plaque that read, "In memory of peace, kept and koi protected." It wasn't poetic, it wasn't flashy, but it was honest. And sometimes that's the best revenge. Quiet, persistent, undeniable peace in the face of someone else's chaos. In the end, Karen never touched the fountain again. Not physically, not through letters, not through back channels or anonymous complaints. Whether it was fear, shame, or finally understanding that she had lost, I'll never know. But her silence became the final act of surrender, and that silence spoke louder than any apology ever could. Life moved on. Seasons changed. The garden bloomed with new colors. The koi grew bigger. Neighbors stopped by more often. The HOA newsletter actually included recipes now. And me? I just kept tending my garden, feeding my fish, and trusting my gnome to keep watch, just in case peace ever needed protecting.